Welcome to Asiatique. I'm your host, Dr. Raymond. Just this 2nd of May, U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines appeared to throw cold water on Republican claims the demonstrators were being influenced by adversaries of Washington, such as Hamas or China. At the hearing, Haines told the Senate Armed Services Committee that officials have yet to see intelligence that Hamas, or possibly China, is actually influencing the Gaza-related protests occurring in the United States or directing it in any way. Now, Jeanne Shaheen, a Democratic senator, repeatedly pressed Haines on claims that Chinese sympathizers are funding some of these protests to exploit the situation in Gaza. And Haines responded saying that she was not seeing information that indicated that the Chinese government was directing that. Now, I'm sure you notice that these dialogues always appear in hearings, but do you know why? What has that to do with us? Now, in this episode, we'll find out. Now, before we look further into what Avril Haines and Jeanne Shaheen really talked about, let me bring you back just a little less than 2 weeks ago when U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited China. Now, he visited China from 24th to 26th of April, and upon returning back to the States, he said he has seen evidence of Chinese attempts to influence and arguably interfere with the upcoming U.S. elections, despite an earlier commitment from the Chinese leader, President Xi Jinping, not to do so. Now, you see, Blinken found evidence, whereas Haines didn't, okay? Now, the National Intelligence Chief said no, but Blinken said yes, okay? So let's continue. So Blinken made commitments to CNN's Carly Atwood in an interview on 26th of April at the close of the 3-day trip to China, where the top American diplomat has spent hours meeting with top Chinese officials, including President Xi, as the two countries navigated a raft of contentious issues, from U.S. tech controls to Beijing's so-called support from Moscow. Now, Blinken said he repeated the message President Joe Biden gave to President Xi during their summit in San Francisco last November, and that message was not to interfere in the 2024 U.S. presidential elections. Now, then, President Xi had pledged that China would not do so. Now, according to CNN reporting. So, where is the evidence then? Now, listen carefully. When asked whether China was violating President Xi's commitment to President Biden so far, Blinken said, "We have seen, generally speaking, evidence of attempts to influence and arguably interfere, and we want to make sure that that's cut off as quickly as possible." Now, and then he continued, adding that there was concern about China and other countries playing on existing social divisions in the United States in influence campaigns. Now, he said, any influence by China in our election is something that we're looking very carefully at, and is totally unacceptable to us. So I wanted to make sure that they heard that message again. Now, according to the CNN report, Beijing has repeatedly said it does not interfere in the U.S. elections based on this principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs. Now, indeed, China actors that are believed to be affiliated with Beijing have been accused of political interference in other countries, such as Canada. So, where is the evidence, after all? Now, Blinken didn't say. He didn't even suggest nor provided the slightest clues. So, was it via the internet? Was it in some form of hacking? There was just no further information. Blinken didn't provide anything. What he really said was that he wanted to make sure that the Chinese heard it. That's it. Heard that message again. So why would he have said so? Now, in order to understand this, let's see what Blinken said about support for Russia. Now, Blinken also said that he used this meeting to raise the Biden administration's concerns about China's support for Russia's defense industrial base, and to stress that further action would be taken by the U.S. on top of existing sanctions on more than 100 Chinese entities and individuals if such support continues. Now, he said that the U.S. believed that Chinese support was enabling Russia to ramp up production of tanks, munitions, and armored vehicles, and to continue his onslaught on Ukraine. Now, and then here's the meat. Blinken said, "What we said to China is this: we're going to take actions we already have, and if it doesn't stop, we're going to have to take more action, and you can anticipate as well that other countries will too." Now, adding that he has also raised the issue to both Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi as well as President Xi. Now, and then he concluded saying, "We're looking to them to act, and if they don't, we will." Now, Blinken also said the Chinese counterparts had not acknowledged the role of these goods in the war in Ukraine, but instead they characterized this as trade with Russia and said Moscow's success didn't depend on China. Okay, so where's the problem here? Now, what Blinken did was to ask someone repeatedly about something that someone had not done. And if you don't fight back, simply because you think that's inappropriate, right? You've been asked a million times. Now, he'll continue. Okay, now that you're not getting it, so you're not going to act. Huh, and we will, and you see. Now, from a different angle, this is like bombarding you with an irrelevant question so many times until you feel numb. And so when you choose to ignore that question because you've been hearing it so many times, that guy will say, you're not getting it, you're not hearing it. Let me reiterate again. And then he'll go into the press and say, hey, he wanted to make sure that you heard that message again. And he wrapped this up by saying, we're looking to you to act, and if you don't, we will. What's the best body language for this? I mean, in response to this, it would be like, what? And sorry, this won't be reported by any mainstream media. And by the way, all of a sudden, the goat is yours. So what could you possibly do? I mean, in front of this kind of a series of questions, nothing. Definitely nothing. And now you know why China has previously slammed the United States as making groundless accusations over normal trade and economic exchanges between China and Russia. You see, if Blinken were to say this 1,000 times, this would become a fact to just anyone. China is supporting and it interfered in the US elections. Well, what? The point here is that it's much more easier to fool people, and I mean American friends here, than to tell them that, sorry pal, you've been fooled. I mean, it's so difficult to tell people that you've been fooled when you are already getting the wrong message. Now, this explains why you often hear China saying that it maintains neutrality in the Ukraine war and has continued to present itself as a potential peace broker in the conflict that no one seems to believe. Now, thanks to American propaganda and the mainstream media, when you're being questioned like this over and over, you eventually feel numb about the whole thing and choose to ignore that question. And the guy who kept on asking wins. It's that simple. So the moment you keep on asking, you've been doing this, you've been doing all these bad things, right? Over and over. And even if you haven't done a thing, no one would believe. By the way, did you notice why Blinken chose to visit China from 24th to 26th of April? Now, the Chinese Navy was actually celebrating its 75th founding anniversary as open day events held all across the country. Note how the media was reporting this. Let me read you some of the lines. Now, these are very interesting. Number one, China shows off nuclear might ahead of top US diplomat Antony Blinken's visit. What? Okay. Number two, Chinese Navy releases video showing launch of JL-2 ballistic missiles from nuclear submarine in display of its second strike capability. Number three, the footage shared as part of the Navy's 75th anniversary celebrations comes just days before US Secretary of State travels to China. What? Wait a minute. Blinken could have come later or earlier. The Chinese Navy wasn't showing this because of Blinken's visit, but it was Blinken's visit that was carefully scheduled so that it clashed with the Navy's 75th anniversary. Look at what the media has reported. It's totally the other way around, as if the Chinese were showing off their whatever missiles during Blinken's visit. No, that's not true. The picture alongside the report made it as if China was showing off its missile and was saying, hey, you there, eat this. No! Now, from another angle, this is much like those pictures, those photographs showing the Tiananmen Square under a cloudy day with Chinese soldiers showing a long face. I mean, that kind of an iron curtain dividing the US and China. No, go and visit Beijing, visit Tiananmen Square and see for yourself. People are happily strolling around and kids are playing, running and laughing, much like the Central Park in New York. Don't be taken in by the media. Go and see for yourself what China has become. That iron curtain is long gone. Now, going back to Avril Haines and Jean Shaheen, now that very same thing happened. Shaheen repeatedly pressed Haines on claims that Chinese sympathizers or even the Hamas are funding some of these protests to exploit the situation in Gaza. Now, Haines responded by saying, I am not seeing information that indicates the Chinese government is directing that. That's a very clear answer. Yet Shaheen repeated her question just like Antony Blinken. Now, if you read a piece of news like that, you would probably think that Shaheen has her point and that Haines was just, trying to hide something and not tell the truth. But wait a minute. You are the director of national intelligence, and when you say that there's no such a tip, there is no such a tip then. Who else would know better than Haines? Now, on the other hand, let's say if Haines was actually lying by claiming that there's no such tip when there's really such a tip, okay? Then what's the story behind when the director of national intelligence had to say that there's no such tip? it must be for the good of her country, the United States of America. Shaheen was actually using the same tactic as Blinken. She wasn't doing good for the States, but only herself. So you might ask me, if this is just a selfish act, what was Blinken trying to benefit from then? Now do you know that according to insider sources, recommendations for actions against Israeli military and police units for receiving U.S. aid after reviewing allegations that they committed serious human rights abuses were actually sent to Blinken way back in December 2023. Now those documents, according to the report, they said they've been sitting in his briefcase since then, and Blinken did absolutely nothing. The news that leaked out saying President Biden might be sanctioning Netza Yehuda, the Israeli military unit accused of rights abuse against Palestinians, only came when Blinken was in China from 24th to 26th of April. Wait, Blinken is a Secretary of State. In other words, if he were an official in some other countries, he would have been called the foreign minister. Now, it was his job to talk about sanctions, and he ran away from that by visiting China. Now you see why I believe that his visit was carefully calculated, carefully scheduled. It wasn't China that was showing off during his visit. It was Blinken who chose the best timing for running away from his duty through bad-mouthing China. And most Americans bought his shit, right? And at this very moment, Chinese President Xi is now in France. So let's see what the French president is going to say afterwards. We'll see. So until then, ciao.
Before you leave, please be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with your friends. See you in the next episode.